Hey, it's Vest Guy, or should I say, Sheriff Vest Guy with a top 5 video for you. It's been a while. I like westerns. Do you? Well, I'm pretty sure the westerns that you've seen are Django Unchained or Hateful Eight, and while those are great, there's an origin. There's older westerns out there that are really good that you should check out. That's why I'm doing the top 5 today. Are you ready? Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. There's an honorable mention that we need to put. That's Son-in-Law.
Son-in-Law, man.
That's a western.
The best western there is.
Yeah. If it wasn't for the producer, it would have been a number 1. But anyway, at number 5, we have 1993's Tombstone, starring Kurt Russell and Val Kilmer. There was another film that came around the same time, actually came out a year afterwards, called Wyatt Earp with Kevin Costner. And while that movie is not that bad, it gets a lot of hate, this one does a better representation of what happened in the gunfight at OK Corral. It's gritty, it's action-packed, it's fun, has great cinematography, and it does a good portrayal of the Old West. And there's a great sequence with Val Kilmer in a bar. That's all I'm gonna say. Check it out. It's one of the more, it's not so violent. I think even kids can watch this movie. But yeah, check it out. Number 4 is High Noon. This movie stars Gary Cooper, and it's from the 50s. So we're going way back in time. So this one was shot in the Academy ratio, which is the 1:33 ratio. So you're not getting a lot of the widescreen aspect, but it still has a great view in my opinion. Shot in black and white, it has a great story. It's basically a sheriff who has to defend town, a coward town that doesn't want to help the sheriff from these banditos that are coming in. Great story. It also has Lee Van Cleef in an early role. If you don't know Lee Van Cleef, he would go on to do a lot of spaghetti westerns like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and Fistful of Dollars. But this one is great also because it has a typical trope that's used in a lot of films where the bad guy comes in a train and it's only one person defending the town. But this is the first movie to do that, and it does it so well. It's actually one of the first films that has a Hispanic actress being identified as a Hispanic character in an American setting. So check it out. So number 3, Once Upon a Time in the West. So this was done after the Dollars trilogy or the Man with No Name trilogy starring Clint Eastwood. Clint Eastwood was originally going to star in the role, but it went on to Charles Bronson. And Charles Bronson was actually the guy they wanted in the first place, but they couldn't afford him. And then eventually they did with Once Upon a Time in the West. This is a big spectacle western with a lot of great locales, nice cinematography. If you're into film, there's a lot of cool shots that you can look at that will you can use in some of your shorts. Another thing that I like is Charles Bronson's interpretation of the character Harmonica, who is kind of the protagonist, but not really, because the protagonist is this other lady who is widowed and she has to deal with this land and she doesn't know what to do with it. But Harmonica's character is so mysterious and intricate, you don't know what he wants or what he's about, and there's a mysterious past involving that harmonica. On top of that, it pays homage to the old American westerns. So it's both a spaghetti western and American western combined. It has a great soundtrack by Ennio Morricone, who did the soundtrack for the previous spaghetti westerns. And he also did the soundtrack for Hateful Eight. So if you like the soundtrack in Hateful Eight, go check in the past the movie Once Upon a Time in the West. Number 2 is Unforgiven, starring Clint Eastwood. This movie was nominated and it won Best Picture. It's a great movie. It's very gritty, it's very dark, but it's so well written. David Webb Peoples is the screenwriter of Unforgiven, and originally Clint Eastwood wanted to change a lot of the dialogue, a lot of the stuff that he wrote, but he actually said, you know what, let's make this film as it is, and it won the Best Picture award. So what's the story about? Clint Eastwood plays a guy who used to be a bounty hunter, who used to be a drunk, and he was kind of like a lowlife, but his life was turned around. So we're seeing him many years later as a family man. He still has a calling to his old life. So it's kind of like old habits kind of never really die off. Him and Morgan Freeman's character are seeking bounty for a woman who was brutally raped and almost left to die. And they have to find the people who committed the crime. And it's kind of a deconstruction of the Western. So it's basically establishing that the whole gunslinger thing, that's a myth. It's not real. It's something that people would see in little novellas and little strips in newspapers. But there's a character in this movie we don't reveal too much about. He believes in the myth of the Western, like in this film. Like he believes that it's all kind of like real, that kind of like what they did in the movie Logan. I don't know, remember in Logan where the kid believes like all that stuff with the action figures. It's kind of like that in this film, where he's seeing a whole bunch of like stuff with cowboys and shooting people, and then there's a scene where he finally like life hits him in the face, and it's like, oh shit, this is a lot tougher than it really is. So, but that's all I'll say. But when you watch the movie, you'll see that this is so well written, great dialogue, and it's, in my opinion, truly the final Western. Like, this is the movie that like concludes the whole like Western myth. Like, it kind of closes. It's kind of like what Casino Royale was to the James Bond franchise. Unforgiven is what that is to the Western genre.
So that means number one is low.
Well, well, it's kind of like a Western. You even think about it. And it drew inspiration from a lot of Westerns like Shane, and even from Unforgiven when you look up and think about it. But number one is a Western that came out in the 60s, and I'm actually wearing the shirt right here, and that's The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. It's the best Western. And it's crazy how this is not an American film. This was an Italian, German, French, Spanish production. And Sergio Leone knew so much about the American Civil War history that he used all that information and placed it in the film of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, which is really about three bandits who are in search of a lot of money and gold. Thing is that each character knows something about the whereabouts of this gold. And they don't like each other, but they have to work with each other. It's a really long film. It's about 3 hours long. It's actually longer if you watch the extended cut, which was restored in 2003. I personally prefer the theatrical version. There's no need for such long sequences, but I do like the long sequence at the end, which is so well done. It's cinematic, which is the epic gunfight in a cemetery. Only Sergio Leone could have done the cinematography that's magnificent. The movie what's curious about, which was Sergio Leone's technique for most of his films, was everyone spoke the language they knew. So he liked eyes and he liked specific types of faces. And everyone in this film looked like they belonged in that time period. So you have a character who is speaking French, and Clint Eastwood is speaking in English. Then you have another character that comes in and speaks in German. So no actual audio was recorded live. Everything was done in post. And this is back in the day where everything was done in celluloid. You know, you had mechanically editing everything. I can imagine the nightmare that it was editing that. But they did an amazing job, and it stands as the best Western of all time, and it's not even American, it's an Italian film. And what I love about the movie is the fact that each character has a history with one another, and at the same time you don't know much about them, and you're learning about them through the process of the film. Sergio Leone originally mentioned that he liked more the way the film looks and everything around it, not so much the story, but the story is so well done, and it has an iconic soundtrack by Ennio Morricone, who did the soundtrack for Once Upon a Time in the West, and of course also it's more modern, but it has that iconic, I can't do the actual melody, but you probably have heard it so many times before. If you've never seen Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, you have to check it out. This is one movie, along with The Godfather, that I never ever want to see be remade. This needs to be reserved as is, not touched. Definitely check it out on Blu-ray. Sadly, the Blu-ray is the only version you can see that has the extended cut, which I'm not a big fan of. I would say watch first the theatrical cut, which is the intended version that the director wanted. Whereas the extended cut is not bad, but it adds some things that I think are redundant. But that's just my opinion. So those are the top 5 Westerns of all time, and I'm Vest Guy. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, please leave it in the comments section down below. Make sure to like and subscribe. Share this video with all your Western buddies or people who have never seen a Western. Make sure that they get into the mood of watching Westerns, because these are the classic films that inspired a lot of modern filmmakers. Anyway, guys, until next time.
I hate to break it to you, they just announced a remake for The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly for 2020.
You're fucking kidding me.
I'm kidding you.
Yeah.